Welcome to FlavorScience from FlavorSome, where we explore some of the formulation and flavor challenges that brands face with food and beverage product development.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 18th episode of FlavorSome's ongoing Flavor Science series, Solving the Reduced Sugar Challenge, Optimizing Taste in Lower Sugar Formulations. I'm Philip Beckett, Senior Consumer Insights Manager here at FlavorSome. Today's webinar is our second of 2026, and we'll have several more coming throughout the year. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. And if you're new to these webinars, welcome and enjoy the next 45 minutes or so. Today, join us as we learn about the impact sugar reduction efforts have on perceived taste. As we will cover, sugar reduction is important to manufacturers, formulators, and end consumers. We all know this is a growing trend. Before we start, we have a few points to help the session flow smoothly. If you've received the sample kit with the beverage syrups, we'll be tasting it a bit. Please have it nearby and ready for that portion of the webinar. As we instructed, please have enough seltzer water to fill the bottles up to where the neck starts to shrink. We'll show an image later on showing the preferred fill line. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature in the Demio platform to submit them. Should be up in the upper right. We'll answer as many as we can in the time allotted. We'll also be sending out a few polls during the webinar. When those go live, you'll see a little polls tab appear in the upper right. You'll receive a copy of these slides and a recording of the session to view again at a later date and to share with others in your organizations. We'll also be posting the recording on our website and our podcast, Flavor Science from FlavorSome, available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Joining me is Casey Rhodes, Application Scientist, and Pete Sauer, Flavor Development Manager. Casey, Pete, can you introduce yourself, please? Pete?
Hi, I'm Pete Sauer. I am a flavor/application manager at FlavorSome. I have been working in flavors and beverage in particular for 28 years now, where I have developed both flavor and finished beverage for consumers.
Fantastic. Casey?
Yep, I'm Casey Rhodes. I've been with this company for 12 years now, and I work in applications. I do some product development work, and I have some pretty extensive applications work through confection, dairy, beverage, alcoholic beverage, pretty much anything that has a flavor component to it I've worked on.
Fantastic. Well, thanks to both of you for joining today. I'm going to go ahead and share these slides. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about solving the reduced sugar challenge, optimizing taste in lower sugar formulations. So how do we balance sugar reduction, sweetness, and taste expectations? Data from Innova Market Insights shows that reductionism is a core dietary strategy people are undertaking as they alter their eating habits. 29% of people globally list reduction or reductionism as their number one strategy of altering eating habits and dieting. What does reductionism mean? Really, we're looking at taking away things like high fat, high salt, high sugar. 40% of these people who are using reductionism are limiting added sugars, while 30% are following a sugar-free or low-sugar diets. So we know that this is a very important effort, not only here in North America, but globally. But striking the balance between sugar reduction and delivering the expected taste is really the crucial goal. Only about half of people are willing to compromise on taste for a reduced sugar or naturally sweetened alternative. So you really need to meet those taste expectations while achieving those label claims and those actual reductions in sugar. And we'll be talking about how the use of one of our technologies can help enable that goal. So what we find in North America is that added sugars are the top ingredients that shoppers are limiting. This data also comes from Innova from their 2025 Health and Nutrition Survey. And we see that 43% of North Americans are really trying to limit added sugars. We see that artificial sweeteners, things like aspartame or sucralose, round out the top three avoided ingredients, with about 1/3 of people trying to avoid those artificial sweeteners. And this is it changes based on the generations. So while awareness of sugar stigmas are prominent, it depends really on the generation. So what we see here is that Gen Z, are they avoiding any ingredients? About 38%. And of that 38%, 44% are avoiding sugar. With millennials, we see about the same number avoiding any ingredients, but the avoiding sugar number jumps quite a bit to just a little over half of those 36% of millennials avoiding any ingredients are specifically avoiding sugar. Gen X, we see about the same number avoiding any ingredients, about 1 in 3. And again, that number jumps even higher to 61%. And then boomers, we're at about 31%. But of that smaller number of boomers avoiding any ingredients, sugar really jumps up to 71%. Of those people avoiding any ingredients are avoiding sugar. So this is true across all generations. But as older people are queried, we find out more and more that they're trying to avoid sugar. So it's just really an interesting stat to me that as you query older generations, it becomes more and more important. But of course, you have to balance that with the perception that this doesn't taste like it used to. So again, that's striking that balance between those perceived, what they're looking for, and then what their perceived taste expectations are. So Casey, Pete, with recent low sugar projects that you've done, are these generally around no added sugar, no artificials, just general reduced sugar? Just sort of a off the cuff question there.
I'm definitely finding that it is lower added sugars, usually being trying to keep it around like 5 grams of added sugar and keeping the calories on the lower end.
Okay. Casey, how about yourself?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of projects come through with non-sugar, but I always try to push just a little bit of sugar because it kind of helps those high intense sweeteners kind of balance out a little bit better. So if we can sneak in just like a gram of sugar with some high intense sweeteners, it usually performs a little bit better than a complete sugar removal.
Yeah, just rounding out that sweetness curve a little bit with the real deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so we see that consumers are trying to avoid sugars and sweeteners. The other factor in this is regulatory pressure. So regulatory pressure is really accelerating the sugar reformulation push. In both the US and in Canada, there are government actions underway. There's the FDA proposal about front of pack declarations, added sugar reduction strategies. There's Canadian front of pack labeling pressures coming on as well. Sugar is becoming more visible. In the EU, for example, they have what's called the traffic light system. An example here, fats in this example are low, sugars are very high, so it's red. Salt is medium, so it's yellow. So a very easy to understand kind of system. For Health Canada, they have specific callouts on the label. And so this is helping shoppers notice sugar levels much more quickly at a glance without having to turn the pack around even. Reformulation pressure is building. So brands are evaluating sugar levels. There's just general increased scrutiny of formulas. This has sort of been ongoing for many years in the industry with the clean label push and simplifying ingredient decks. And there's exploration of flavor solutions. If we're going to take out sugars and other sweeteners, how can we build that back with flavors that might have a sweetness perception just built into them? And what this really means is there's opportunities for brand innovation. So reduced sugar product claims that we'll touch on here in a moment, taste preserving solutions, which we'll be tasting a little bit later. And this really does sort of give you, if you're able to balance this out, give you that competitive edge for success in a crowded marketplace. So what we found is that the rise of sugar reduction really is more than a passing fad when you combine all of these pressures, what consumers are looking for, what regulatory pressures are coming on, and so manufacturers are responding accordingly. Looked at the past 5 years of sugar reduction claims in North American product launches. I took out things like beer and wine, These are really just, food and non-alcoholic beverages. But what we see is that no added sugar there in the magenta pink line, roughly about the same percentage of launches over the last 5 years have carried a no added sugar. You're right around 6% of launches carrying a no added sugar claim. Sugar-free, so entirely sugar-free formulations have grown, particularly in the last 12 months, from about 4.5% of all launches carrying that claim to just shy of 6% through March of this year. And then low or reduced sugar, a little bit lower overall, hovering around 2 to 3%. But in the last 2 years, 2 to 3 years, you've gone from 2% of launches with a low, no reduced sugar claim up to over 3%. And while this doesn't look like a huge number of products, it really is. I think there was over, 28,000 products in this data set, but really want to look at CAGR, so compounded annual growth rate. Over this time frame, all product launch activity has grown about 1.8% compounded annually. That no added sugar, so that magenta, is actually lagging overall launches a little bit. But again, it is the largest sugar reduction claim that's out there. But when you look at sugar-free and reduced sugar, they're really driving sugar reduction claims, the growth in sugar reduction claims versus the no added sugar. So sugar-free, the CAGR is 9%, reduced sugar, 8.5%. So we're seeing quite a lot of development going on at those levels. And this really does factor in to what categories we're talking about. So I pulled the top 10 categories with sugar reduction claims over the same time frame. We see snacks, nutritional drinks, sports and energy drinks, rounding out the top 3. We see things like bakery, dairy, and juice drinks, along with flavored waters, sweet spreads, carbonated soft drinks, which we'll be tasting a little bit later. A lot of growth there with sugar reduction claims, almost 20% CAGR. And then desserts and ice cream. So Casey and Pete, as you work on a lot of these different categories, I just want to get your experiences with some of these different product categories as they relate to sugar reduction efforts. Casey, why don't you kick it off?
You inherently lose some texture and body when you remove sugar. So that's just kind of something that from a product development standpoint, you kind of expect. So to counteract that, it's almost more important to optimize the flavor. So just dialing in and enhancing the flavor of the product is how you're going to really get a good product out of a sugar reduced formula.
I know you recently did something with dairy beverages. Can you expand on that a little bit? I mean, pretty strong growth there at 7.5% CAGR.
Yeah. So I recently just did a demo similar to the one we're going to be tasting today with flavored milk. So I utilized the Sweet Opt modulator, and it was really successful. It performs really well in dairy products. So that's an option too.
That's great. Pete, what about you? Any recent experience here within one of these categories, just briefly?
Within it, I mean, for me, it's been a lot of like the sports and energy drinks recently. And as Casey is pointing out, the flavor and building some things into the flavor really can aid in making that transition of reduction more seamless. Also, with those items, we have between the energy premix and the electrolytes that go in there, that also aids us in building back some of that mouthfeel at the same time.
Excellent. And one thing I noticed here is categories where sugar actually plays a pretty good functional or structural role, something like bakery or desserts and ice cream. It's actually pulling back a little bit. Do you think that's because of that functional structural property that sugar has in those applications?
I would say yes, it definitely does.
Yeah, definitely. It's sugar is highly functional. So
yeah.
what you do is you'll want to add some form of gum system to kind of help build back that texture. And while it does work, sugar kind of remains king in that aspect.
The gold standard.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right, excellent. So I just wanted to have a few product examples from shelf over the past year or so. Really how brands are communicating their sugar reduction efforts. And what we see is there's front of pack, there's different badges, there's call outs near the nutrition facts panel. So just across some of those top 10 categories, this is a fruit leather type snack. You can see called out right on front under the new badge, made with real fruit, no added sugar. This came out last month, and 55% of people said, yeah, I would likely purchase this product. Within sports and energy drinks, excellent segue there, Pete. This came out in January, 0 grams of added sugar. They put a nice little badge right on the front of the pack next to the product imagery. 56% of people will likely purchase this. Within bakery, so more in the bar category, this came out in November of last year. Not quite badging, but prominent callouts on the front of the pack. 1 gram of sugar on the back, where they give a little description. They say it's low sugar. 46% of people said they would likely purchase this, outperforming the category as a whole. And then within flavored water, this is a yuzu mandarin sparkling water from Spindrift. Came out in December of last year. Straight up unsweetened, but they do use some real juice. So there are some natural sugars in there. So there is some sweetness. And near the nutrition fact panel specifically calls out 0 grams of sugar added. And this had 50% likely purchase, significantly outperforming the category. So we see a lot of different methods to communicate the different types of sugar reduction efforts that we see. And this is translating to how people talk online. We use a tool called TasteWise to sort of do social listening, social discussion listening, and just pulled out a few examples here. This is a 2-ingredient chocolate rice cake. You can get the recipe from this person if you comment on their Instagram post, but they specifically say it's low sugar, better for you, 2-ingredient rice cake. And this had a little over 71,000 likes on Instagram. And one thing to note here is that low sugar, people trying to be low sugar, it's not always a dietary choice, but sometimes it has to do with biological processes. This woman posted that she had diabetes from pregnancy. I can never say that word. But she had months of low sugar and carbs while craving all the sugar and carbs. And so when she finally gave birth, she had, I think it was a donut. But sometimes you're meeting biological needs by having lower sugar and not just dietary needs. And then an ingredient from Pinterest, we just had Easter, so I thought this was appropriate. This was a healthy 4-ingredient Reese's type egg. They call out specifically it's vegan, low carb, gluten-free, and low sugar, with about 145,000 saves. And with Pinterest, when somebody saves it, that's them saying, I'm interested in making that. So I'm going to save this recipe and possibly make it at home. So it's a good indicator of maybe there's something, a white space in the marketplace for a product like this. So with that, we're going to introduce Sweet Opt from FlavorScience. So we have a couple videos that explain what Sweet Opt is. So we're going to pass it over to one of our flavorists, John, to sort of discuss that a little bit more.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Rubel, Senior Flavorist here at FlavorScience. Today, I'll share an overview of flavorings with modifying properties, or FMPs. I'll explain what they are, why they matter in food and beverage development, and how they help improve taste. According to FEMA, FMPs are flavoring substances used in compounded flavors to modify the overall profile. They change perceptions of taste attributes in both the flavoring system and the finished food or beverage. One important note, if an ingredient creates a technical effect beyond flavor, like sweetening, it is no longer an FMP. It must be labeled differently. We strongly recommend working with regulatory experts to help determine proper ingredient labeling. Today, people read product labels closely. They want less sugar and sodium, plus added functional ingredients. This creates formulation challenges. FMPs are powerful tools that help balance these systems. They reduce perception of bitterness, mask off notes, restore mouthfeel, and help improve overall taste. They help products feel complete and not thin or unbalanced. FMPs work synergistically with your existing flavor system to deliver a balanced, pleasant sensory experience, especially in tricky bases. At low levels, FMPs enhance and optimize taste without adding their own dominant flavor. At high levels, they can act more like ingredients and lose FMP status. When reducing or removing sugar, several issues can surface. Flavor intensity drops, The timing of sweetness onset can change. Aftertaste may linger, especially from high-intensity sweeteners. FMPs help restore balance and improve taste perception.
All right. Nice little background from one of our senior flavors, John Rubel, on what FMPs are. So Sweet Opt from FlavorSome offers true-to-taste modulation. Want to run through this a little bit. So we know, as we discussed, that North Americans are increasingly interested in functional foods and beverages that offer benefits: high protein, energy, low fat, reduced sugar. We recognize the challenges that food and beverage formulators face when using tricky bases, plant-based proteins, soy, inclusions like vitamins, sugar alternatives, high-intensity sweeteners, or minerals that can impart undesirable tastes and off notes. And so Sweet Opt technology helps create a sweetness flavor experience that feels fuller, rounder, and more balanced. In reduced sugar formulations, they play a critical role in improving sort of the shopper expectations, meeting those taste expectations. It tastes like what I've been promised. So it helps address several key challenges. Supports a faster onset of sweetness, replicates the intensity of sweet flavor perception, reduces lingering sweetness and bitterness, and it does have some mouthfeel enhancement. Pete, I know you've worked with this recently, putting these demos together. How do these all how does Sweet Opt sort of come together and address these challenges?
When we initially were doing the sugar reduction, of course, the first thing we would note would be right up front is that mouthfeel, the loss of mouthfeel, and the Sweet Opt definitely brought that back to more along par with the full calorie version, our standard, our control, and brought that sweetness back when we had dropped the sugar and the item that we were working with. So it brought that back to basically what the industry standard of a ginger ale would be, and making it taste and have the mouthfeel that you would expect a full calorie item to have.
Excellent. Thank you. So how Sweet Opt from FlavorSome affects the taste experience? We're going to dive into sort of that sweetness curve here a little bit. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. So how Sweet Opt from FlavorSome affects the taste experience? Sugar reduction. It supports sugar reduction when used at the recommended application rates. Those can differ based on category. We recommend working with regulatory, both your own internally and here at FlavorSome to make sure that you're within those regulatory bounds. It improves quality and balance, the flavor sweetness, really sort of making sure that nothing is off kilter. Sweetener efficiency, it reduces reliance on high intensity sweeteners, potentially can do that. It helps smooth bitterness. So it smooths bitterness and that lingering sweetness that you might get from some of those, from some sugar alternatives. It is natural and non-GMO. It aligns with those goals when used at those recommended usage rates. And it is certified kosher and halal compliant. Casey, Pete, did I miss anything there?
No, I think you nailed it.
Yep.
All right, excellent. So now we're going to visualize sort of the impact of Sweet Opt. So we saw this curve a little bit in John's video, but this is sort of a conceptual time intensity sweetness profile showing sucrose, sucralose, and stevia. And when you're formulating a reduced sugar formulation, Sweet Opt can really tackle several major challenges. It helps support a more intense and aligned onset of sweetness, sort of pulling it closer to that sucrose curve, to where it might take a little bit longer to have an onset, but then it's a much more intense onset versus something like sucralose. It aligns that intensity more closely with sucrose over time. So you're not going to get those sort of sweetness peaks that you might get from some other sweetener alternatives or high intensity sweeteners. And it reduces that lingering sweetness and the associated off notes that with some sweeteners would be very, very noticeable. Pete, anything to add, or Casey? All right.
No.
So now we're going to get into the tasting. So if you have those, if you got one of the sample boxes, please have those ready, and we'll go through the intro.
Hi, my name is Casey Rhodes, and I'm an application scientist here at FlavorScience. As you've heard in today's webinar, we've been discussing flavors with modulating properties, or FMPs. We've prepared a tasting demonstration to bring the power of these solutions to life. This demonstration will involve tasting 3 different ginger ales, one with full sugar, one with reduced sugar, and one with reduced sugar plus True Sweet. True Sweet is an FMP from FlavorScience. We've picked a carbonated soft drink for today's webinar, but True and other FMPs from FlavorScience are applicable across a wide range of food and beverage categories. If you were one of the first 25 people to register for this webinar, you should have received a sample box. Inside are 3 labeled bottles with flavored syrups. At this time, please use the seltzered water we asked you to have on hand and fill each bottle up to the 10-ounce mark.
All right. Thanks for that pre-record there, Casey. And one thing to note, we changed the name. So while things might say True Sweet, it really is now called Sweet Opt. So it is the same product, just a slight change in name. So with that, let's go ahead and taste the full sugar version.
We're going to start with the full sugar ginger ale as a baseline. This is a classic ginger ale flavor with a finished Brix of 9. As you taste, you'll first taste the sweetness from the sugar, followed quickly by a gentle and warm ginger note. You might even pick up some light lemon or citrus notes as well. One thing to take note of is the mouthfeel. You can tell this is a full sugar formula, although not as high as some other soft drinks.
Okay, so I think we can all agree that that's a pretty good normal full sugar ginger ale. Excellent flavor selection and formulation there, Pete. But why do we pick ginger ale? Looking at Mintel launch data, ginger ale over the last 5 years was the 6th most commonly launched product within the carbonated soft drink category, behind things like cola, orange, lemon, lime, root beer. And what we found is there's a lot of very high-end premium ginger ales, and there's also a lot of private label ginger ale. So it really does run the scope from store brand all the way up to super premium. We have a few examples here of sort of these full sugar ginger ales. So this one from Tops in a 2-liter standard soda bottle. We see there that it includes 32 grams of added sugar. So maybe not the sweetest soda that's out there, but very, 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 very sweet, full of added sugars. Then we have this very premium version out of Quebec. And if you look on the ingredient deck, it's a little small, but there's actually 34 grams of added sugar in this single can. So that's why we picked ginger ale as sort of the flavor to test and to showcase Sweet Opt across the board. So with that, we're going to go ahead and taste the 25% reduced sugar ginger ale.
Now we're going to taste a reduced sugar ginger ale. This product has a finished Brix of 6.8, which is a 25% reduction in overall sugar. After tasting this version, you'll notice a reduction in the upfront syrup sweetness compared to the full sugar version. The ginger notes may become more prominent or sharper due to the reduced sugar content. The citrus notes stand out more clear, and it may taste crisper or drier. One of the biggest differences is the mouthfeel. With lower sugar, this version is thinner, lighter, and a bit more watery than the full sugar version.
All right, so that was our 25% reduced sugar ginger ale. And so when we're reducing sugar within any sort of product, we always like to look at sort of what the baseline nutritionals are. Again, we use Mintel launch data. So looked at the reduced sugar, or the levels of sugar and reduced sugar and full sugar products. And these are all per 100 mils. So you can think of these as a percent. But what we see is that all carbonated soft drinks over the last 5 years, they've been mostly around that 5 to 6 grams of sugar per 100 mils of product. In the last year, it's really dropped quite a bit. But when we see those no added sugar CSDs, sometimes they're pretty high or even averagely higher than the totality. And that could be due to the inclusion of natural juices, So there's natural sugars in there, but no added. But we see that, they're typically around sort of that 3 grams per 100 mils, so about half the amount of sugar. And then there's low reduced sugar CSDs, really sort of running the gamut where sometimes it's very, very low, and sometimes you're around that 2.5 to 3 grams per 100. Specifically with ginger ales, I pulled a few reviews from Amazon for specifically low sugar, reduced sugar soda formulations. So this one from Demi-Do, low sugar ginger ale. Overall, it has a 3.7 with about, I'll say 80 ratings. And we see that there's a 3-star rating here, good but not great. It tastes to be good, but not as strong as I would like. The 80 calorie was a big plus, as was the use of real sugar. So there's real sugar in here. It's just reduced. And that's something that product like Sweet Opt could help build back some of that flavor and that sweetness. And then you have this Gus, also known as Grown Up Sodas, extra dry ginger ale. It has a 4.2 overall with 71 ratings on Amazon. But this person gave it a 1-star and simply said does not taste great. We don't know why, if it's the ginger, if it's the sweetness, but this is also a reduced sugar. It has 90 calories per serving. So now that we've sort of covered that, Pete, I'm going to start with you here. As you were developing these and tasting this, what differences do you pick up compared to the full sugar version?
When you go to that 25% reduction, there is definitely that loss of mouthfeel and sweetness. I mean, ginger ales aren't overly sweet to begin with, but you can definitely notice that drop in the 25% reduction. For me, it's always, I get hit with the mouthfeel first, and then it's okay. It's not as sweet. It seems much thinner than the control standard product is.
Casey, how about you? What do you notice, or was it similar or the same, different?
No, I agree with Pete. Mouthfeel, it's lacking in mouthfeel. The sweetness is kind of lacking. And then I'm kind of getting some peaky, citric, acidic notes. It's just overall a more unbalanced flavor profile than the full sugar version.
Yeah, I would agree. I also noticed that the flavor clears a lot faster off the palate. Right, excellent. All right, so now we're going to taste the third demo of the day. So, Casey, you get to watch yourself one more time.
We're going to finish the demonstration today with the reduced sugar ginger ale plus our Chirop Sweet. It is important to note that this is the same formula as the reduced sugar ginger ale, just with Chirop Sweet added in. The upfront flavor is more rounded compared to the reduced sugar version. The ginger notes remain a bit sharper than the full sugar version, but smoother than the reduced sugar version. The overall spiciness remains mellow. The citrus notes are a bit less tangy, resulting in a more refreshing and less acidic finish. The mouthfeel is much closer to the full sugar version, not as thin feeling and less watery. It pleasantly coats the mouth, but without the gritty feeling that can sometimes come from high sugar content. The demos we sampled today showcase how flavors with modulating properties can enhance the taste experience in reduced sugar soda formulations. FMPs like TruOpt can help optimize your formulations. Don't forget, FMPs can be used in a wide range of food and beverage applications. Please reach out to us if you would like samples of TruOpt Sweet from FlavorSome, the ginger ale flavor we used today, or any other flavors. If your project is underway and you need support with applications or flavors, we can help.
All right, excellent. And for those in the audience, I've turned on a poll. So in the upper right, you should see next to the Q&A button a poll option, and you'll see a question there. So please feel free to answer, and we're sharing these answers with the audience today. So 25% reduced sugar ginger ale plus Sweet Opt. So Sweet Opt can work independently to mitigate the impact of reduced sugar on flavor perception and still show its natural flavor on product labels when used at recommended usage rates. If Sweet Opt usage levels exceed recommended application limits, it will lose natural flavor status. And what ends up happening is you'll have to label constituent parts of the product. And so we've worked closely with our regulatory team to come up with max usage rates in a few categories. For beverages like the demo today, It's at 0.11% is the max usage rate to maintain that natural flavor status. Within breakfast or baked goods, it's a little higher at 0.33%. So again, if at or below those levels for those particular categories, you can call them natural flavors. Above that, yeah, it'll have to be called out as its constituent, parts. But again, always consult regulatory, R&D, and or legal experts. We can help you with that. Please reach out to us. We are an extension of your lab and your capabilities. So with that, as the poll continues to come in, Casey, Pete, what do you think of how this compares to both the reduced sugar version and the full sugar version? Casey, I'll start with you, since Pete, I know you've tasted this 1,000 times in the last couple of weeks. So Casey, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so it's definitely an improvement compared to the reduced sugar version. The biggest thing for me is that the flavor carries further. It doesn't just drop off. You're definitely, the sugar's not there. So you're lacking the mouthfeel, you're lacking the texture. And I think the modulator that we're using is definitely helping to bridge that gap. So it's not as noticeable. And I think it's a definite improvement.
All right. And Pete, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, but I'm going to turn on the other poll that we have. So audience, you'll see another poll pop up. So please go ahead and fill that out as Pete answers the same question. What kind of differences do you notice between the full, the reduced, and the reduced plus sweet opt?
Yeah, I mean, as Casey was pointing out, when you go to the reduced without the sweet opt, the flavor dies. It just ends off abruptly. Where with the sweet opt, it allows it to bridge that gap, and the flavor tails off like the full sugar ginger ale does. I get a little bit more mouthfeel. It's not an exact match to the sugar, but it definitely it helps compared to the sample of just the 25% reduction.
Yeah, I would actually agree with both of you. If I had to put these in some sort of order, I do love sugary sodas. I try not to drink them, but I'm going to put the full sugar at number 1, but definitely reduced sugar plus sweet opt at number 2, and then the reduced version, sort of a distant third. And mostly, Casey, to your point, where that flavor doesn't just drop off right away. And Pete, to your point, I do get definitely more of a mouthfeel than from just the reduced version.
I also think the flavor is just more balanced compared to the reduced sugar. Like it carries better, and then it's also more balanced. So it's kind of rounding everything out as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's probably why for me, the reduced sugar is sort of a distant third. I can tell it's ginger ale, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's the best ginger ale, and now we know why. It's sort of been handicapped a little bit by having a quarter of the sugar taken out. So to the audience, thank you. I see some questions coming in, but I just want to. I'm sure you can all see the polls, but for anybody who's listening, we asked them, can you tell the difference between the reduced sugar and the reduced sugar plus sweet opt ginger ales? 71% said yes, a big difference. 21% said yes, a subtle difference, and 7% said no, I cannot tell a difference. And they're still coming in, so that's great. And then actually asking about preference, which do you prefer, the reduced sugar or the reduced sugar plus sweet opt ginger ale? 71% preferred reduced sugar plus sweet opt. 29% said the reduced sugar, and nobody said no preference. So Pete, I think this is a testament to your formulation, and I think just to the power of sweet opt and what we've developed here at FlavorSome. So with that, we have some final thoughts from John, our senior flavorist, just to sort of close out before we get to the Q&A.
Identifying the need for an FMP early in development is ideal. This makes formulations smoother and more effective with better results. Some FMPs have little to no taste, working quietly in the background. Others have subtle organoleptic or sensory nuances. Performance can shift depending on the formula, Proteins, acids, and processing methods, such as UHT and HTST, are all considerations. The industry is moving from full sugar removal to smarter reduction. FMPs play a key role in helping formulators maintain flavor profiles when sweetener levels or systems change. A common mistake when incorporating FMPs is adjusting dosage without testing, or combining FMPs without validation through proper sensory evaluation. Suppliers like FlavorScience provide tested usage levels that reflect rigorous testing. Any change requires sensory and labeling review. FMPs are game changers for creating great tasting, better for you products. Please reach out to FlavorScience with any questions about FMPs or other flavor solutions.
All right, excellent. So we're going to go on to the Q&A. We did include a little bit of we'll call this crib notes, questions to consider when using Sweet Opt and other FMP solutions. So let's get into the questions here. I see a number of them. Okay. What would happen if Sweet Up loses natural flavor status on my product? I see a couple of questions sort of around this theme. So we sort of covered this already, but if you're using Sweet Up at a limit that's higher than that's recommended, beverages at 0.11% and breakfast or baked goods at 0.33%. It may result in what's called a technical effect in the finished food that's not a flavor function. So it'll actually be acting as a sweetener. A sweetener cannot be called a natural flavor and would have to be listed as its common name. So that's why we highly recommend using at the recommended level, so it can still be listed as natural flavor along with all of the other natural flavors in your product. So it doesn't have to increase the length of your product, your ingredient deck. So hopefully I see a few questions sort of around that question, and hopefully we answer that. If not, please reach out to us about your specific case, and we can talk you through that. Pete, this one is for you. So how does Sweet Up interact with acidity in sodas? Does it help manage sharpness when sugar is reduced? We just had a tasting. So I think maybe if you sort of geared around that, what we just tasted, that'll probably be a really good way to answer.
Yeah, and in this case with the ginger ale, it's the identical amount of citric in all three samples, and again with the 25% reduction without the Sweet Up, you can tell there's a little bit more of a sharpness that kind of changes the character of the ginger ale. With the Sweet Up, it took that edge off that was in that 25% reduction and made it taste again more towards the full calorie version. It definitely helps to take off the edge. When you compare this to, say, some of the high intensity sweeteners that are used in diets, there's usually a difference in acid. There's on a diet, you usually go much higher. It, for a couple of reasons, gives you a little bit of mouthfeel, but it's to take off some of that edge of that high intensity sweetener in the end.
All right, excellent. I see a question here. You're demonstrating Sweet Up, but our FMP we're tasting is True Opt. It's the same product. We just had a change in names from True Opt Sweet over to Sweet Opt. It is the same product, just a change in how we're marketing it. Casey, you had talked about dairy a little bit. How does Sweet Opt perform in dairy systems like yogurt or flavored milk, where both creaminess and acidity play a role?
Yeah, it functions really well in dairy products. I've done some pretty extensive work in flavored milks, and it actually performs really well. And also from a mouthfeel and texture perspective, because in these types of products, you can also use, and it's common to use things like carrageenan and starch, and you kind of already have those thickeners in there to help kind of back up the texture and the body of the product. So you're not adding any ingredients to the label. You're kind of just tweaking them a little bit more to build back that the body and the mouthfeel. So along with that, there's other things in the product like proteins and some natural sugars natural occurring sugars that it plays well with. So you can also get away with using significantly less than the max use rate of the Sweet Opt.
Oh, that's really good. That's really good to hear. And you mentioned flavored milk. Would that apply in something that's fermented like a yogurt that might have live cultures in it?
Yeah. So like those are going to be inherently tangy. So I think it's going to help round those products out as well.
Great. I don't see any more messages coming through, any more questions, I should say. And we're right at time. So to everybody who's on the call, thank you very much for joining us. As we mentioned several times, if you have any questions about Sweet Opt, other flavor solutions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And to both Pete and Casey, thank you for joining us today. Pete, thank you for putting together these delicious samples. I now have what looks to be about 29.5 ounces of ginger ale left to drink over the next couple of hours. But with that, I'm just going to say thank you and appreciate everybody's time today.
Thanks for watching this episode of Flavor Science from FlavorSome. Whether you want to formulate with a tried and true flavor or innovate with a brand new creation, having a great flavor partner accelerates your success. At FlavorSome, we combine expertise, responsiveness, and infrastructure to deliver an all-in-one solution that helps growing food and beverage companies improve their speed to market. Part of our mission is making flavor sourcing more efficient, effective, and enjoyable with best-in-class responsiveness, competitive lead times, and products designed to meet your goals. Work with us to create the delicious new products your customers are craving.